The alarm in my chest went off before the one on the wall did. I had been on the station for 6 hours, and already a woman twice my rank was gripping my arm hard enough to bruise it. "Do not sit there," she said. "Do not even look at her." Her name was Priya Nandan, second engineer, and she had met me at the docking bay with a tray of instructions I did not ask for. Where to sleep, where to eat, which corridors flooded with radiation on odd hours, and now, apparently, who not to sit beside in the mess hall. I followed her eyes across the room. At the far end of the hall, alone at a table built for 8, sat a woman who did not look human, but looked lonely, in a way that needed no translation. Pale blue skin, hair like white smoke pulled into a braid, eyes the color of deep water. She wore a uniform that was not a uniform, more like a formal robe cut to fit a working ship, and she ate her food with the careful, practiced stillness of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. Every other table around her was full, loud, alive, and there was a gap of at least 3 empty seats on every side of her, like she was standing in the eye of a storm that everyone else had agreed to avoid. "Who is she?" I asked. "Sable Ethrin," Priya said, lowering her voice like the name itself was dangerous. "Princess of the Ithran Compact, third in line for a throne that controls half the trade routes in this sector. Then why is she eating alone?" "Because that is the rule," Priya said. "Her caste cannot share a meal with anyone outside noble blood. Not officers. Not diplomats. Not us. If you sit at her table, you are not just being rude. You are committing an offense that her people take seriously enough to break treaties over." I looked at the girl again. She had not moved. She had not looked up once since I entered the room. She ate like a woman performing a task, not enjoying a meal. "Nobody's told her that's stupid," I said. Priya's face went pale, in a very different way than the princess's skin. "Do not," she said. "Do not say that out loud. Not here." I did not promise her anything. I picked up my tray, walked across the mess hall, past 6 tables of aliens and humans, who all seemed to hold their breath at once, and I sat down across from her. The whole room went quiet enough that I could hear the hum of the air recyclers in the ceiling. Sable Ithran looked up at me for the first time since I had walked in. Her eyes were wide, not with anger, but with something closer to fear. "You should not be here," she said. Her voice was soft, careful, like she had rehearsed calm 1,000 times. "Why not?" I said. "It's just lunch." "It is never just lunch," she said. "Please, before someone sees." I glanced around. Everyone had already seen. A few officers near the door were whispering into their comm units, probably reporting the exact thing she was afraid of. "I'm Daniel," I said, because introducing myself seemed like the only sane thing left to do. "Daniel Hart, new transfer, engineering." She stared at me like I had spoken in a language she did not recognize, even though the translator implant behind my ear made sure every word landed clean. "You do not understand what you have done," she said. I sat down and ate my food, I said. "I understand that part fine." For 1 second, just one, something flickered across her face that was not fear. It looked almost like the beginning of a smile, quickly swallowed before it could grow into anything real. Then the doors at the end of the hall opened, and 2 of her own guards walked in, tall figures in dark ceremonial armor, and the moment was gone. They did not shout. They did not need to. They simply stood behind me, one on each side, close enough that I could feel the cold coming off their suits. "Crewman," one of them said, "you will remove yourself from this table." "Or what?" I said, before I could stop myself. "Daniel," Sable said quietly, urgently. "Please, just go, I am asking you." I looked at her, really looked. Under the practiced stillness, under the careful posture, there was something exhausted in her eyes, the kind of tired that comes from years, not days. She was not asking me to leave because she wanted me gone. She was asking because she had learned, the hard way, that wanting things led to punishment. I finished my food anyway, slowly, on purpose. Then I stood, nodded to her, and said, "See you around." I did not look back at the guards. I did not need to. I could feel their eyes on me all the way out of the mess hall. That night, my supervisor called me into his office. Captain Aris Dawson was a broad-shouldered man, with a gray beard, and the kind of patience that came from 20 years of holding a ship together with duct tape and stubbornness. "You made an impression today," he said, not looking up from his console. "Didn't mean to cause trouble," I said. "You didn't cause trouble," he said. "You caused a diplomatic memo. There's a difference, but not by much." He finally looked up at me. "The Ithran Compact runs on caste law older than this station. Princess Sable's bloodline forbids contact with anyone outside the noble houses. It's not a suggestion. It's woven into their treaties with half the coalition. Break it enough times, and ships stop docking here. Trade stops. People lose jobs. Maybe worse." She looked like she hadn't talked to anyone in years, I said. "That's not our business." "Isn't it?" I said. "We're on the same station. Same ship, basically. If someone's drowning in the next room, it doesn't stop being our business just because a rulebook says so." Dawson leaned back in his chair, studying me the way you study a piece of machinery that is behaving in a way it shouldn't. "You're new," he said. "Give it a week. You'll understand why we let this alone." I did not argue with him, but I also did not agree. The next day, I sat beside her again. This time, fewer people gasped. Word had spread fast, the way it always does on a station where everyone knows everyone's business before breakfast. Some crew members glanced over with open curiosity. A few looked away entirely, like watching might make them guilty of something. Sable did not tell me to leave this time. She simply watched me sit down, waiting, like she expected the guards to appear again at any second. They did not come. "You are either very brave," she said, "or very foolish." "Probably both," I said. "Where I'm from, those aren't always different things." "Where are you from?" "Small town. Farming country. Nothing important enough to end up in any history book." "Everything ends up in some history book," she said, "even the small towns." We ate in silence for a while after that, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not the silence of a wall between us, but the silence of two people figuring out how to talk without breaking something fragile. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You have already asked several things." "Fair. One more then. Why does your own family want you alone? Not the treaty stuff. The real reason." She set down her utensil carefully, like she was deciding how much of the truth she was allowed to give me. "Because a princess who has no friends has no loyalties," she said. "No one to speak through her. No one to whisper ideas into her ear that are not sanctioned by the throne. My mother believes isolation keeps me pure, untouched by outside influence, easy to control. That's not protection," I said. "That's a cage with good lighting." Something in her expression cracked, just slightly, like ice under careful pressure. "You should be careful how you speak of my mother," she said, but there was no real anger in it, just old habit. "I'll be careful," I said, "but I won't pretend a cage is a home just because someone calls it one." She looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time since I had met her, she did not look away first. Over the next several days, I kept sitting with her. Not every meal, because Dawson made it clear my other duties still existed, but often enough that it became a pattern the whole station noticed. Some crew members started nodding to her in the hallways, small gestures they would never have made a week earlier. A cook began setting aside her favorite dish without being asked. Small things, human things. But not everyone was pleased. On the 6th day, I was called to the docking bay to meet a shuttle that had not been on the schedule. 2 more of Sable's guards stepped off first, followed by a tall, sharp-featured woman in formal Ithran robes, radiating the kind of authority that made even Dawson stand a little straighter. "That is her mother," Priya whispered beside me, gripping my arm again, harder this time. "Queen Halvet Ithran. She does not travel unless something has gone wrong." The Queen's eyes swept the docking bay and landed on me like a targeting laser. "You are the human," she said. It was not a question. "Daniel Hart," I said. "Engineering. You have been sitting with my daughter." "I have." "You understand this is forbidden." "I understand it's your rule," I said. "Not mine." A ripple went through the guards behind her, a tightening of posture that suggested my answer had not been the correct one. "You are a low-ranking crewman on a station that exists because of trade agreements with my compact," the Queen said, her voice calm in a way that felt more dangerous than shouting would have been. One word from me, and this station loses docking rights for the next decade. Ships stop coming. Families here lose their income. All because you could not resist sitting at a table. I felt the weight of that. I was not foolish enough to think my choices existed in a bubble. But I also thought of Sable's face, the exhaustion behind her careful stillness, and I could not make myself regret the last 6 days. With respect, I said, if your whole compact can be shaken because your daughter had a lunch with someone, maybe the problem isn't the lunch. The docking bay went very quiet. Somewhere behind me, I heard Dawson let out a breath like a man watching his career catch fire. The Queen studied me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, something like amusement flickered across her face, gone as quickly as it appeared. Humans, she said, almost to herself. No sense of hierarchy at all. We have hierarchy, I said. We just don't let it decide who eats alone. She turned without another word and walked further into the station, guards falling into step behind her, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding harder than it had in the docking bay drills we ran during training. Dawson caught up to me a moment later, gripping my shoulder. You just talked to a reigning queen like she was a supply officer, he said. Did I get us kicked out of the trade agreement? I asked. Not yet, he said. But you might have gotten yourself killed, and me fired, in the same conversation. That takes talent. That evening, Sable found me in the corridor outside the engineering bay, her guards notably absent for the first time since I had met her. My mother spoke to you, she said. She did. What did she say? That your whole compact might collapse because of a lunch, I said. I told her, maybe that says more about the compact than about the lunch. Sable's eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought I had finally gone too far, said something that would end whatever fragile thing had grown between us over the last 6 days. Instead, she laughed. It was quiet, surprised, like the sound had been locked away somewhere, and just found its way out for the first time in years. No one has ever spoken to her that way, she said, not even my father, when he was alive. Someone probably should have, I said. You could be executed for less, she said, though the humor had not left her voice. Good thing I'm not from around here then. We stood in the corridor for a while, not saying much, just existing in the same space without anyone rushing to pull us apart. It was strange how quiet the whole thing was, considering how loud the consequences could be. Why do you keep doing this? She finally asked. Sitting with me, speaking to my mother the way you did. You gain nothing from it. You risk everything. I thought about how to answer that honestly, without making it sound bigger than it was. Because I watched you eat alone for 6 days before I ever spoke to you, I said, and I couldn't figure out a single good reason why that should be normal. Not because you're a princess, not because I wanted to make a point, just because nobody should have to eat every meal of their life alone while a room full of people watches and says nothing. She did not respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. On my homeworld, they teach that closeness is a weakness in someone destined to rule, that bonds make you predictable, and predictable rulers are easy to defeat. Sounds lonely, I said, and lonely people make worse decisions than connected ones. I've seen it. Isolated people don't get wiser. They just get more afraid, and afraid people make bad calls when it matters most. She looked at me for a long moment, like she was turning that idea over slowly, testing it for weak spots, the way an engineer tests a hull before trusting it in open space. You are a strange kind of dangerous, she said finally. I get that a lot, I said, though it was not entirely true. I had never once, in my life, been called dangerous before that week. 3 days later, the Queen requested a formal meeting with Dawson, myself, and Sable in the station's central conference room. I walked in expecting to be reassigned to the farthest, coldest corner of the ship, or worse. Dawson walked in already looking like a man rehearsing an apology in his head. Instead, the Queen sat at the head of the table, hands folded, studying me with an expression I could not quite read. I have spent 3 days considering your words, she said. I do not enjoy admitting when a lower-ranking human has given me something to think about, but I am old enough to know Pride is a poor advisor. I wasn't trying to lecture you, I said. No, she said. You were trying to eat lunch. That is what made the words land. You were not performing kindness for an audience. You simply behaved as though my daughter was a person, because to you, that fact required no explanation. Sable, sitting quietly beside her mother, watched this exchange with an expression somewhere between hope and disbelief. The caste laws will not vanish because of one lunch, the Queen continued. Some traditions run deeper than a single conversation can undo, but I am willing to reconsider the rule that forbids my daughter from choosing her own company, at least while she serves aboard this station. Sable's breath caught audibly, a small sound in a very large silence. You mean that? She said to her mother. I mean that I watched a human crewman risk his position, and possibly his safety, for the sake of a lunch companion he had known for less than a week, the Queen said. That kind of loyalty is not manufactured. It either exists in a person, or it does not. I would rather my daughter be surrounded by people capable of that loyalty than isolated in the name of a tradition that no longer protects anyone. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, which Dawson later told me was probably the smartest choice I had made in the last 2 weeks combined. The meeting ended without threats, without diplomatic incidents, without a single mention of lost trade routes. The Queen left the station the following morning, her ship disappearing into the dark with far less ceremony than her arrival. That evening, the mess hall looked different. Sable sat at her usual table, but this time, there was no empty ring of seats around her. Priya sat across from her, tentative at first, then relaxed as the conversation grew easier. A few other crew members drifted over during the meal, testing the new boundaries, the way people always test something that used to be forbidden. I sat beside Sable, same as always, though it no longer felt like an act of defiance. It just felt like lunch. You changed something enormous, she said quietly, watching the table fill around us. I do not think you understand how enormous. I just sat down, I said. You did the rest. You're the one who kept talking to me, instead of sending me away for good. I could have, she said. I should have, by every rule I was raised on. Good thing you didn't. She smiled, small but real, the kind of smile that had clearly been waiting a long time for permission to exist. Good thing, she agreed. Word of what happened on our station spread through the trade routes faster than any official report could have managed. Other stations, other crews, started asking questions about their own untouchable passengers, their own isolated dignitaries sitting alone in mess halls out of habit no one questioned anymore. I never set out to change anything bigger than one lonely lunch. I still do not think of myself as someone who did anything remarkable. I saw a person eating alone, and I sat down beside her, because that is simply what you do when you notice someone hurting, and you have the choice not to look away. Maybe that is the part of being human that confuses everyone else in the galaxy the most. We do not need a treaty, or a bloodline, or permission from a queen, to decide that someone deserves company. We just need a chair, an empty seat beside a stranger, and the plain, stubborn refusal to let another person sit alone if we can help it. That is all I did. I sat beside her anyway.